Welcome to the Burden of Truth program here today, where we take the burden of proof and we put some truth in it. Silence in the face of evil is still evil. And the only thing that can shine brightest in the darkness is the truth. And so in this program, we are going to shine bright. We're going to speak the truth. We refuse to be silent, and we will step up and be the warriors that we were all created to be, because we all need to ask ourselves, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? So the best tool we can use in that battle is the truth. So that's what we're going to cover here today. Today, I have Representative Dave Zimmerman with me, a good friend of mine. He's been representing, I'll let him introduce himself a little bit here, but he's been a representative of ours in the state of Pennsylvania for, I believe it's 12 years now?
8 years.
8 years, excuse me. Sorry, 8 years. And with the redistricting, we're going to cover that a little bit today, but I'd like just a little bit of a history from you, Dave, on where you're from, how long you've been doing this, just a little bit of, let everybody know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm State Representative Dave Zimmerman, representing the 99th District, which is kind of that northeast part of Lancaster County and jumps into Berks County a bit as well. Grew up on a dairy farm, had a long agriculture career, did quite a bit of traveling over the years, and then was involved in the county. I was on the county planning commission for a time. I was on the Lancaster County Ag Preservation Board. I was a township supervisor in East Earl Township, and kind of got involved politically through those avenues, and was also on the county transportation committee for a time as well. So then, when this position opened up, I made a run for it, and I think there was 5 of us Republicans vying for the position, and so here I am, 8 years later.
Awesome. I think what drew me to you originally was just the candid conversations we've had and the truth. I keep talking about the truth being the true weapon we have in this fight, because it is a war of good versus evil. And I've been asked many times, what evil are you talking about, Dan? And, you keep saying good versus evil, and it's war, and you shouldn't say the fight. And let me tell you, it is absolutely a war of good versus evil. We see it within our schools. We see it absolutely within our political realm and government. And if we don't stand up now, we won't have a country to stand for.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting on that comment on truth is that right in the House chamber in Harrisburg, in the ceiling, engraved in the ceiling, is John 8:32. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. It behooves all of us to take another look.
If you haven't been to the Capitol, our state capitol is one to be admired. It is unbelievable. It is full of biblical grace and lessons throughout the whole chamber, throughout the entire Capitol. So something else Dave didn't say in his introduction is he's a little bit of a historical buff. William Penn savant, we'll say, so he loves giving tours with William Penn. If you don't, obviously Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods, but William Penn is truly the one that initiated freedom of religion within this country, if you would dial it all the way back to its core foundation. So I recommend that you see Dave up at the Capitol, and he'll probably would love to give you a tour up there too. So those of you that aren't in Pennsylvania, come visit. Those who are in Pennsylvania, go visit. Do a little staycation.
It's I'm happy to do a tour for anyone. It's a story that too few know. But when you go back to our ancestors, things were so bad in Europe, and all the fighting and scrapping between the various church denominations and groups and individuals and the state church and the likes, and our ancestors actually said goodbye to family, which they probably knew they'll never see again. They get on a boat that you and I don't want to get on, Dan. They spend 4 months on the ocean. Some die on the way. And they get here and they find wilderness. But that's how desperate they were for freedom. And I just can't say enough about that, because today the question really is, by so many, what are we doing? What is government doing because I have this sense that they're trying to mandate, they're trying to control, taking away the very reason our ancestors came here and the very reason William Penn had this vision to provide religious freedom in Pennsylvania and make this the model for religious freedom, not only for the New World at that time, but the world over. He wanted this to be the model where the various groups, the various individuals can all live together, work together, and in peace and respect one another and the likes of that. And we need to go back to that. We need to reinstate that.
Let's remember, as we talk about the war of good versus evil, evil is anything that takes away the liberties and your freedom to choose your own path in life. And we find that we're in a current time where the government is telling us what we should be doing, how we should be doing it. They're guaranteeing our happiness by giving out free handouts. And the only thing that does is it truly enslaves the citizen rather than allowing the citizen to choose their own freedom and path of liberty. And we forget William Penn was actually imprisoned in Europe because he was out preaching that liberty and freedom, freedom of religion. So we don't talk about that. So William Penn, because William Penn's father, correct me if I'm wrong, William Penn's father was owed a great debt by the king, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So the king owed William Penn's father. So they figure, okay, well, let's take care of your son who's in prison right now. We'll send him over the pond. We'll let him go over and see how he does managing things over in the New World. And William Penn comes over and doesn't fall in line, starts doing his own thing and creates Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, where he allowed freedom of religion, the Quakers and all these other different, aside from the Catholicism and Catholic, because that was prevailing and that was being driven into the people. And so if you weren't Catholic at the time, you were a problem.
Yeah.
And so we forget about all these. So we look today at the war that we're fighting. We look at what the government is doing to us today, which is very similar to what was going on back then. Mm-hmm. But we have much more. We have media sources that are telling us a different story. We have, political sources. We have our churches telling us a different story to pray and wait from a church standpoint, or we're being told from the media standpoint what they want us to know. Yeah. And so I come back to this, and what has prompted me, and the Lord has opened these doors for me to do this and have this meeting with you and have this conversation with all of our listeners, is we need to put on the full armor of God, Ephesians 6, in this battle, and our weapon needs to be the truth right now. And we can't be afraid because, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. We're going to talk about the establishment. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things here, politically, what's going on with you right now. And so knowledge is power. And I don't think we're getting enough knowledge out there to the true citizens who want to fight this war and save our country. We don't know what to use. So I'm going to give you guys some truth. We're going to talk about what's really going on behind that Wizard of Oz curtain. And you're going to have to make your own decisions on who those warriors are and who's actually standing out there fighting for you and truly America first, or who's out there truly being establishment first, because there's a definite, succinct difference between the two. And we're seeing absolute establishment first rather than America first. And I don't know who I'm more mad at, Dave. I don't know if I'm more mad at the Republicans or the Democrats, because the Democrats have been telling us exactly what they're going to be doing, and they're doing it. And the Republicans are allowing it. And so I don't know who I'm more angry with, the establishment or the Democrats. I almost want to say the establishment. So we're going to go into a little bit, and we'll talk about, we want to see the 2020 elections a little bit, but we also want to visit on some, Supreme Court stuff. We were talking before the cameras came on. We're talking about what happened with the Supreme Court in 2016, which is a huge play because we've seen that a lot of these election issues that we've had not started in 2016. They came really apparent in 2016 with the success of Donald Trump through that entire, backing or going against the establishment, bucking the establishment, I should say. And then what happened in Pennsylvania in 2016 with the overturning of how our Supreme Court was held to where we're at today with election redistricting and what happened to you. So we're going to kind of go through that and let our viewers and listeners know what actually happened. So I'm going to set, you have anything that you want to comment on that before I kind of set the baseline of where we're going here?
No, that's some good issues. We can talk a long time about all of
We
them,
can
I'm
talk
sure.
a long time. So buckle up. We won't go 3 hours. I know right now about the attention span of most listeners is about 3 minutes. So we're going to try to keep them engaged here. But again, I said this is the Burton of truth. We're going to talk about some truths, and you could correct me if I'm wrong because you're in the battlefield every day. You're in the trenches, and so I get my 10,000-foot view of what's going on in Harrisburg, and what we can see what's going on federally. But we'll try to stay Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for right now, and where you're at. What I want to first talk about is, because I think this is so significant. The Supreme Court change in 2016. So you want to talk a little bit about that and what happened in 2016? You were saying it's a seven seat position. So we were 4-3 in 2016, and that swung majorly the other way.
Yeah. Well, and it may have been an election cycle prior to that, but nevertheless, for many, many years, there were, out of the 7 Pennsylvania Supreme Court judges, there were four Republicans and 3 Democrats for many, many years. And so then,
which shouldn't
then
be
we
a politically
flipped it.
charged seat, right? It's supposed to be.
It should not, because
just so we have that
let's just
clear.
think about that. When you think about our founding fathers had this vision of three different branches of government, and as kind of a check and balance. And when those 3 are balanced and doing their job, so to speak, that actually works quite well. When you have the legislators making law, when you have the judges interpreting law, and when you have the administration carrying it out, that works well. But when you have, and what's happened since these 5 Democrat judges and 2 Republicans are on the bench, it seems like they've been trying to make law from the bench rather than just doing their job of interpreting. So that's what we've dealt with since we have this kind of a mix in Democrat Republican on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
So let me run this down. So how the Supreme Court. So what Representative Zimmerman is saying is basically the judicial branch is making law, which they should not be doing. They're supposed to be doing. So whether you're Republican or Democrat on a Supreme Court seat, you're supposed to follow the same oath of office as the person sitting next to you, whether they sit no matter what side of the aisle they sit on. They still swore the same oath to the same Constitution.
That's correct.
What we are seeing right now in our Pennsylvania Supreme Court is an absolute atrocity to the highest level. They're not following the Constitution. They're making their own laws based upon their own agenda and political beliefs. And that's not what this is about. So we can step federally, we can look at Roe versus Wade. Whether you agree with it or not, that was way out of line for the Supreme Court to even act upon 50 years ago. Right. And so everybody's in fear of losing their rights or whatnot. It was always supposed to be state rights. So in actuality, the citizens are getting their rights back if that decision is reversed. Yeah. And it's putting back in the hands of the states to vote on that themselves. Right. And it should have never been a Supreme Court issue in the first place. So we look at what's happening in the Supreme Court, and I want to talk about the evil that is happening in our state. And we'll go to the redistricting of the maps that just happened this last year.
Sure.
So I'm going to give a brief synopsis through our conversations, and you can correct me, just chime in whenever you want. But what I saw is what we're supposed to do is it's supposed to be decided by the two houses, the Senate and the House, correct?
Correct.
And the two top chairs in both the House and both the Senate from both parties come together. Those 4 people come together, and they draw up maps, and they can figure out who and where should the maps go based upon the census, correct?
Yeah. So
layman's terms here.
Right. No, and you're right, Dan. But yeah, what the Constitution actually says is that it's the 2 leaders in the House. So Democrat, Republican leader in the House. It's the 2 leaders in the Senate, Democrat, Republican, and then the 4 of those are to are to choose a chairman, and that can be anyone. I believe it needs to be a citizen of Pennsylvania and probably registered to vote or whatever, but it can be most anybody from Pennsylvania that would be their chairman. And the Constitution says if they cannot agree on that fifth person, then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court will decide. Well, that's what happened this time. And what they did is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court chose the former chancellor of University of Pittsburgh, which is far left, to be this fifth person. So what you then end up with, you have 3 against 2, and that they're now responsible to drawing these maps, and then they ultimately vote on which models they're going to go with.
So we take that, and I used to be very optimistic, but I look back at this and I say, this is also evil that we're talking about here, because we're looking at those lines, the lines that they all agree on in the Senate. So we have 5, it was a 5-0 vote, or a unanimous vote, correct, with the Senate lines.
Right, we did.
The Senate lines were unanimous.
Yep.
With those 5.
Yeah.
Those 4, so the 4 votes in the 5th chancellor. And then the House was split. But this is the same chancellor that the House had voted on in previous months, because they were not going to fund the University of Pittsburgh because they were literally selling baby organs from abortions. Is this correct?
Yeah, and I do believe that this chancellor was actually chancellor ahead of last June's state budget vote, which included that appropriations for University of Pitt, which is a separate non-preferred vote, which I was a no vote on, but there's 51 of us voted no, but it still
Out of
ended
how
up
many?
passing. But I believe this chancellor would have been he was chancellor prior to that, but nevertheless connected to the university. So
Right.
Obviously there's a number of representatives and people across the state that are, pretty unhappy with him being on this, among these 5 making that decision, and with that that University of Pittsburgh vote being so contentious.
So we'll break it down layman's terms here.
Sure.
Our governor goes, we have the Supreme Court unconstitutionally pick that 5th tiebreaker. That 5th tiebreaker is a chancellor of University of Pittsburgh who has probably a bone to pick with those 51 House reps who voted against funding the University of Pittsburgh because the University of Pittsburgh was caught killing babies and selling their organs off for money and profit. So we now have that. I mean, that's just the layman's way of looking at that. I don't know how else you can say it any other way than that. And so we fast forward, we look at the lines senatorially. So I'll say the Republican establishment holds the Senate and the House in Pennsylvania. And normally when you see that, when lines are to be redrawn, usually they try to call it gerrymandering. They try to go that so that, the Republicans will try to hold their seats in the House. And that's what the Democrats do when they hold, that's just the way it is.
Right.
If you are holding a majority, you're the majority of the vote, you should be able to hold the majority of your constituency to that's how you're supposed to be representative.
Right.
The Senate gave up a lot of power through the new lines they drew, but that was all okay, because as long as those that are in charge of making those lines and everything held their own fiefdoms. Now, these are my words, not yours, but this is the way I look at it from a citizen.
Sure.
We then look at evil from that standpoint of how the Senate lines were redone. I mean, I got cut out of my senators. We can talk about that in a second. But the most conservative portion of that senatorial district, that was Ryan Almond's, the most conservative portion was that portion of Pennsylvania, and he cut us out as a Republican. Now, it wasn't him. Now, we can't say it was him, but I'm sure that there's hands in this, okay? We then, and I'll just plant that little seed for all those that are listening, but then the House race is where I have the biggest issues. And so, because this is unconstitutional across the board. So, and again, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
We look at, basically what we did is we put 12 Republicans against each other in these new lines. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to go, all right, if there's 12 Republicans against each other, we lost 6 seats in the House.
Right.
basically, okay? So we have 12 against each other. We're only going to have one Republican coming out on top because it's now king of the hill. Who's going to follow the establishment order? Who's not? Who's going to win? Who's going to stay? Whatever. We now have a chancellor from the University of Pittsburgh now trying to agreeing to these lines that the 12 are going to be against each other. So we lose 6 Republican seats, in essence. Then we also took 6 cities across Pennsylvania and we split those in half.
Right.
Okay. I don't have all 6, but I think it was Allentown, Reading, Lancaster, maybe.
Lancaster, State College.
State College, and Allentown.
Allentown.
And I can't remember the 6th one. So we took 6 cities across Pennsylvania. We split them in half. Normally, cities are going mostly Democrat. So again, a rocket scientist doesn't need to take a whole lot of, he doesn't need to break out his abacus and figure out, okay, we just gained 6 Democrat seats just because of these lines. So we lost 6 there, we gained 6 here. And what's the current swing in our House and Senate right now?
Yeah. So right now we have 113 Republicans. We have 90 Democrats. And I believe this time, this election cycle, we're going to be the majority. We're going to be, I don't think we're going to have 113. We may have more like 106, give or take.
So it's 203 total.
203 total.
Okay.
So it's going to bring that, it's going to bring us closer to even numbers. The risk we have, I think the bigger risk is in 2 years from now. Can we hang on to the House? Can the Republicans hang on as a majority, or are we going to lose it to the Democrats? One thing I want to add.
Who needs election integrity when you can just fix the lines before the elections even happen? Okay, and who's in charge of all that? Jay Corman, all those kinds of folks. And you don't have to answer me. I understand you have a position to fill too, so I'm just going to throw it out there. But
yeah, well, on redistricting, the way redistricting happens, especially for those that aren't familiar with the process here, is that every 10 years there's a census done, and Pennsylvania has some bigger issues because in 2010 we lost population in Pennsylvania when we did the census in 2010. We lost population. We actually lost a U.S. Congress seat because of it. Here we are, 2020. We lose population again, and we lose one more U.S. Congress seat. And what's also happening with these losses, the losses are more in, population losses are more in western part of the state, and in the east we're kind of growing. As a matter of fact, Lancaster County, we went from 500,000 people 10 years ago to over 550,000. We grew by over 50,000 people. And so what it's done, it basically did shift all these seats east because of the losses being in the west. So that's very concerning, and it really upended a lot of seats. There's a lot of seats. Like even mine is going to be about 80% new area because of it. And what's so unfair about that and doing it that way is that I have staff that have been so connected to constituents, and they've been helping them with unemployment, with getting us through this pandemic issue, and retirement villages, within the district where these older folks rely on a district like mine and my staff. They know these people, they know their names, they've built a relationship with them, they know where to go.
True representation.
To get answers from government, and all of a sudden just remove them from that area and bring in a new rep and new people, completely unfair if we're truly about what our founders' vision was, and that is to represent people. The vision our founding fathers had was that the power remains with the people, and we as elected are actually the servants. And I take it further. If you're employed by government, you should be a servant, serving the people that are in this state. And there's where I think we've got it kind of all wrong today, is because in too many cases, it's become about ourselves versus about the people. And I think that's what we have to check ourselves on once again.
So the viewers or listeners, I was a congressional candidate for Congressional District 4, United States House in Pennsylvania just this last cycle, just for the last primary. And that is Berks and Montgomery County. And one of the things that I saw when I was out there is the difference between the establishment first and the America first. Now, everybody wants to say they're America first, but what you're talking about right now is truly America first. And if you look at Representative Zimmerman's district and what it was to what it's going to become after this election, it was, we'll just visually do it. It was the lower portion of Lancaster County, lower and eastern portion of Lancaster County, and now we just slid it up this way. And you know, that southern portion that you had was a huge representation of a lot of Amish and such down there. And now we have, you know, I believe that's Brian Cutler slid over that way. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so Brian Cutler, Speaker of our House right now, slid that way. And now that office, what Representative Zimmerman is talking about here is those Amish, if you don't know, they don't drive cars. And so, you know, getting to a representative's office as an American citizen to take a buggy 30 miles or what 20 miles it is now, as opposed to your office, is true disrepresentation in my opinion. And so the way that these lines were broken down, it was, again, here's my opinion, but the more I look at this and the more I research it, this is all about maintaining fiefdoms rather than maintaining true representation. And that's where I say this is establishment first, not America first. And so we look at how we've manipulated, not we, but how the system and the folks up there in control have manipulated this to maintain power, because naturally, when you have power, you want to maintain it. It is not an object of servitude anymore at that point. It's an object of maintaining your power. And that's what we're seeing well too often across all forms of government. And when you have somebody like yourself or myself step up and say to the people, I just want to go serve the people as opposed to being served, that's what we're talking about. And that is where we're not seeing it. We're seeing the establishment first rather than the American first. So I want to talk about, so we're seeing how the redistricting is, and we saw how that broke down and how we're seeing the breakdown of our society and how it's truly being represented because of these little infightings that we see politically. I don't really believe there's two separate parties anymore. They're all working in conjunction to maintain those fiefdoms, and that's where we say this is not a Democrat-Republican thing. This is a war of good versus evil, because again, evil is taking away your liberties and freedoms, the right to pursuit of happiness, liberty. There's just so many tangents we could go on in this conversation, but I wanted to ask you, we saw, you know, I know you're not going to endorse anybody. We see some of the races that we'll stick to state races. We'll get away from mine and yours. We'll look at statewide races like the Senate one, but we also looked at the gubernatorial race. And a lot of folks don't realize what happened with, we'll just say, Senator Doug Mastriano. And what happened when he was doing election audits, and he was getting a little bit too close to hitting home, in my opinion, and how the establishment, we'll say Corman, Senate Majority Leader, basically fired Mastriano and relieved him of all of his staff, took him off the committee, did so many things against him that a lot of people don't realize. So he doesn't have staff in Harrisburg to be able to help his constituents. I mean, he can't answer 1,000 phone calls a day. He needs staff. So they relieved him of his staff, okay, all because they didn't like the path he was going. And the excuse they gave was, well, we shouldn't have somebody doing an election audit that's running a governor's campaign. Well, then we shouldn't have the Senate majority running a governor campaign then either, should we? We should have had sorry, sidebar there. I'm referring to Jake Corman. So we see what's going on there. And the only thing that came at him was Act 77. I don't know if you're prepared to talk about Act 77. I know you're one of the few that voted against Act 77, right, probably because you focus on the Word of God and you see the truth and you see the evil that is before it's coming. Now, I'm not saying that all those that voted for Act 77 knew what it was about to become, because I don't think anybody could have called that. That's like, right. That's like saying, you know, don't leave your GPS on your dashboard because somebody's definitely going to come smash your window out and steal it. We didn't expect and this is what a lot of viewers and listeners don't understand, that Act 77, as much as Doug Mastriano's taking heat for that and all these commercials and everything, how that was completely, well, bastardized. I don't have a better word. It was bastardized and completely changed by the Supreme Court, which we discussed. Why I talked about that in the beginning of this program too, is the Supreme Court took what was written and completely changed it into their own law, which is unconstitutional in of itself.
Right.
So tell us the conundrum we're at, because I know you did a lawsuit with your own money. Aside from, as a citizen, you did a lawsuit with a few other, representatives and civil servants, we'll say, and you brought a lawsuit up that went to the Commonwealth Court.
Correct. The
Commonwealth Court ruled in favor of your lawsuit, instead of saying it was unconstitutional. So where are we at? I'll let you talk here.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question on Act 77. So Act 77 was passed just prior to the 2020 elections, and it allowed. There was two major components in that bill that raised the constitutionality question. The one was that we added the mail-in ballot. Very significant, because the Constitution says that you have to have a form of absentee ballots within your election law. We've had that. We've had that since about 1937. And so by adding mail-in, this mail-in approach, where it's no excuse, it's a no excuse mail-in ballot, that's significant. That's huge. And that, to me, raises the question of constitutionality. The other piece was that there was so-called straight party voting in the past, which was also been in place for many, many years. And so that was especially used by some of our older folks, where they voted all their life, and it became very easy for them. If they're Republican, they just check Republican, and that meant every Republican was voted for on that ballot. Or if they're Democrat, same thing. And by taking that away, I think we took an option away from our seniors, is really what we did. And again, it was significant enough, it raises the question of constitutionality. And so the bill was passed, and as you said, Dan, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court got a hold of it, and they go and add some things into that thing that they had no right to do, because their job is to interpret law, not to add to it, not to take away from it, not to do any of that, which is absolutely what they did. So as time went on, this bill was passed by the House, by the Senate, and the governor signed it. So we have Act 70, we have Act 77 in place. So what several of us did, there was a rep that came in after this vote, came to the chamber in the next session. He actually ran on repealing Act 77. That was his campaign appeal back in his district in the western part of the state. So Representative Tim Bonner, when he come to the House, when he was elected, he looked me up right away, and he wanted to talk about this Act 77, and told me that he ran on appealing it, and he's an attorney, and so he asked about the possibility of doing a lawsuit. I said, well, yeah, we can certainly look at that. So we did some research. We drafted a lawsuit. We got some other attorneys involved, and then we went to some of the other representatives. And I think we'd have had a number more that would have signed on this lawsuit with us, but we chose to use our own resources to do this lawsuit, not even campaign funds. We used our own resources from our own personal accounts to do this lawsuit. So we took it and took it to the Commonwealth Court. Which,
and lawsuits are really cheap, everyone, just so you're aware. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we took it to
so thank you for doing that.
You bet, because it's important and very important stuff, because it matters for not only us today, but for even generations to come on how we do elections. And today, there's so few that believe that we have it right. There's so few that believe that we're doing elections correctly. And as a matter of fact, when you do polling, election integrity rises right to the top of one of the top issues that people want fixed. So very important. And so went to the Commonwealth Court, and the Commonwealth Court ruled with us that, yes, it is unconstitutional. It should have went from, instead of this bill being passed by the House and then being passed by the Senate and then going on to the governor for a signature and it becomes law, it should have went to the House, passed in the House, went to the Senate, passed in the Senate, and then go to the people and be on the ballot. That's how a constitutional amendment is done and accomplished, is that the last stop is with the people, and it's at the ballot box. That's where Act 77 should have went. And so what happens now is that it's appealed from Commonwealth Court to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. We met with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, or faced them back earlier in the year, and and there's 7 judges. We faced all 7 of those, and they had a hearing on this whole thing, and now it's up to them to rule. There's no real timeline for them to rule, but they have not yet ruled on their position on it. But we're hearing they're really struggling with this one. That the belief is that they also believe it's unconstitutional. So it's a matter of whether they rule that way and rule in accordance with the Commonwealth Court. So, and if that happens and Act 77 is overturned, that means we revert back to the former election law that we had in place since 1937, and that would give us an opportunity to start over. If we need some fixes from there, we can do it and maybe do it right this time.
Yeah. So before we go out and start blaming all these folks that voted for Act 77 in the first place, why don't we start looking at the Supreme Court and their unconstitutional behavior? I don't think Act 77 was good from the beginning. I also thought there was something in there about extended absentee ballots, especially for the military. So that's where you would see a lot of those veterans be okay with Act 77 because of, extenuating absentee ballot timelines. But the reason I bring up Act 77, the reason I'm bringing up all the establishment stuff, is that we want to get to what's really prompted me to want to sit down with you here today. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory of how bad the establishment is. We're out here, and the people of America and Pennsylvania want to have election integrity. They want to have valid elections. Yep. And so we have establishment folks out there that it appears are not really fighting for what the American people want, because we are firing people who are actually doing election audits. We're kicking the can down the road. We're not doing election, we're not changing anything. The Supreme Court is, we're going to wait a little bit. They're obviously delaying that. Hopefully they don't delay it past November. We're seeing all these things to the point where in my race, I saw down in Montgomery County where the establishment is out there touting election integrity, but they wind up breaking their own election bylaws within the party to endorse their next candidate because it was their turn, as opposed to looking at a candidate that's really willing to step up and fight for this country. They broke their own election bylaws in the same sentence as touting election integrity. And so we look at that, and we look at the representation that we're talking about, and we're bringing this all together here and what's going on. I've seen the belly of this beast, and I'm disgusted. It makes me sick, the evil that is actually happening, the misrepresentation, the disenfranchisement that is happening across Pennsylvania in this country. And then I see what happens to you last week, and it just fires me up. Send this war. I'm ready to go to battle over this because now you're my representative, right? But starting in January. But are you truly going to be able to represent me? So let me give you a little bit of a backstory here. We see what's happening. So we saw what happened to Senator Doug Mastriano because of his governor's race. It wasn't okay for him, but it was okay for everyone else. All right. So they cut him out and they take away his staff. I don't think they've given his staff back yet, have they? No. So
I'm not heard.
Last I checked, this was just a few weeks ago. He still didn't get his staff back. So again, they're trying to hamstring people. We look at what happened with the establishment when they were all threatening to back out from within the Republican establishment, to back out of the race and support one other candidate against Senator Mastriano. You know, whether you like Doug Mastriano or not as your next governor, that's fine. But what the infighting within our own party is destroying it. And then they want to come after the folks that are standing up for true liberty and true freedom and standing up in these grassroots groups. I mean, look at the grassroots groups that are coming up here, and some grassroots candidates like myself. We'll talk about Mike Miller, who went against the illustrious Senator Almond. We talk about all of these grassroots folks, and we saw it across York County. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit about these different realms. But then you get sucked into this swamp, blamed for things that you didn't do, and they take you off your committees. And I know that's a really quick snippet of what's going on. So I'm going to let you explain a little bit more in your side of it, and then I can put my little spin on it because I don't have to be political. But we want to talk about, if we're going to talk about true representation and what's truly happening in here and what the establishment is doing to us as citizens and how they're taking away our vote. I mean, elections have consequences. Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about what happened to you a week, or tell our listeners what happened to you last week.
Yeah, sure.
The beginning of this week, I guess it was.
Well, it was actually last week, Dan.
Okay.
So yeah, what happened to me is it would have been last Monday. We were nearing the end of it was a session week. We were nearing the end of session on Monday. The speaker left the rostrum, came back the aisle, and asked me to come back to the back to see him. So I walked back with him, and he says that I was handed this. He had a piece of paper, and he says they're going to be removing you from 3 of your committees. I said, what's that about? And he says, well, I don't know. I said, well, my gosh, I need to know what that's for. He said, well, let me find out for you.
This is the speaker saying
this is the speaker. And then I said,
Brian Cutler.
So who did this? Who decided this? He said, well, leadership. And
isn't he the leader?
He's the speaker, but part of the leadership team for sure.
Okay.
So he said, I wanted to let you know prior to them reading it across the desk. Well, within 2 minutes, they were reading this across the desk. So there was no warning, no nothing.
So you're on the floor, and this gets handed to you as like a note in class. Hey, just to give you a heads up, you're about to get sideswiped.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't handed anything. He said he had the paper himself.
I see.
He just told me. So I know nothing. And then later on that day, I text him, ask him if he's learned anything yet, and he had not, or said he did not. So then, all day Tuesday, and he had a lot going on with session and so forth, but I was put off from meeting and getting any answers. And we get into Wednesday, same thing, all day, and late in the day on Wednesday, I was asked by the leader to catch up after session. I said, fine. And then I also got a call from the speaker to meet. So the leader and the speaker met with me, and they said, well, it's really because you supported, the opponent of Senator Ahmed. And I said, well, my gosh, I didn't endorse him. I gave him no money. I went to none of his events. I was at some events that I was invited to that evidently he was also invited to, and so I don't understand. He said, and then the leader or the speaker actually said, well, it might actually be more of a perception. So here we are.
So you're cut out of your committees.
Yeah.
Because you were seen at events that, we'll just say Mike Miller was running against Senator Almond. I mean, this is in the Senate. This isn't even in the House, right? So, but you're gaining punishment in the House because of somebody going against an establishment person in leadership in the Senate. It's kind of like saying, in my opinion, that sounds just like the establishment trying to be first as opposed to America first, because last I checked, we held elections to vote in people that we wanted to represent us, that held our values. Yeah. And, Senator Almond has been a decent politician, but he hasn't held my values. I mean, we go back to that Pittsburgh vote. I believe he was okay with the funding. He voted for Act 77, but we can use that if we want. They can use it against other senators. We can use it against him, correct? So I don't understand how. I understand the double standard. It's an establishment versus an American first situation. So you're not the only one this happened to, correct? This happened to somebody else.
No, there was another, but let me just add this, Dan, is that keep in mind I was duly elected in a district representing 65,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
The leader of the House was duly elected by 65,000 people in his region. The Speaker of the House was elected by 65,000 people. Of course, 65,000 didn't vote for him, but that's how many we represent after we've been elected. And so to take that voice away, and for example, the committees that were removed would have been agriculture, which is huge. I mean, my district has become the capital of the world's capital for produce. I mean, that's what we do now with these small farms for them to survive with the fertile soils they have, but the very small acreage and all, they've resorted to produce. It's become huge. These guys need a voice and somebody that understands and knows something about agriculture. So by taking me off of that, these people do not understand. You're really punishing them. You're not punishing me. You're punishing my constituents. And so then also removed from insurance, which I was actually on an insurance board in a former life. And so, I understand some of that as well as you do, Dan, I think.
Small business owner, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Understand that.
But that's another committee. And then I was also removed from appropriations. And keep in mind, we need to have a budget by the end of June. We're required by law to have a state budget by the end of June each year. And so we're getting very close to that. So we're going to be in a lot of days going, from here to the end of June to get that accomplished, which I think we will. But here we are. I was part of that process until last week. And so now I'm no longer on that committee. And not that I have to be on that, but the idea that I'm not and they've done this just divides the caucus when the caucus needs to be together on doing a good, reasonable, common sense budget in the end of the day. And so that in itself is just wrong.
So let me break it down for 65,000 people that just lost a voice. That's what it basically comes down to. So we have agriculture, appropriations, and insurance. You are my representative starting here in January. I lost my voice. So, folks that are listening go, oh, so what? He lost his committees. What? Another politician losing his committee seats and whatever. Who cares? That happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Who cares? She's still rolling big down in D.C. No, this is what this truly means. That as my representative, if he's no longer on a committee that makes those decisions, that puts those laws into committees, that get them out to the House to vote on, then we're losing our voice from an agricultural standpoint, which is one of the biggest part of our entire economies.
Right. So number one industry in Lancaster County, number one industry in Pennsylvania.
Right. So we just took a true voice of representation of myself and 65,000 other people in this part of Pennsylvania, and we stomped that voice out because of politics and because somebody's throwing a temper tantrum. That's the only thing I could get, because they didn't want the American people to choose what was best for them. They wanted the establishment to choose what was best for them. And we see that example over in York County as well, where a gentleman over in York. So if you're listening from York County, the same thing is going down over there with Representative Mike Jones, correct? Mike Jones?
Right.
And he lost his seats on the committee because now he was a little bit more vocal in some of those local races. But the ones he was vocal about, I believe they lost their seats in the primary, which is what the American people are supposed to do in a good vote. If you don't like what they're doing, you vote them out. That's the threat of not doing a good job for the American people. So those folks that got voted out, I believe one was the chair of the Appropriations Committee. So
yeah, so the representative was Mike Jones, and the chair of the Appropriations Committee, Representative Saylor, lost his race by a pretty wide margin,
70%.
And 70%. And what Representative Mike Jones did is he actually came out publicly and endorsed the opponent to Chairman Saylor that's the appropriations chair.
So let me get this right. Mike Jones exercised the First Amendment? in his own beliefs and what is for freedom of speech, and then he lost his committee's chairs seats, and lost. Then now we're going to punish him by punishing all of his constituents too by losing their voice in the House. So he gets up, does his American duty and freedom of speech, and saying, "Hey, I'm going to endorse these guys because they're going to be better for the American people," as his own free speech and his own free will, which he should be allowed to do. But because he goes against the establishment, they're going to take him out of his role.
Yeah.
Kind of,
Well,
and the same thing they did for you, to you. I mean, you didn't go as far as what Mike did, but just because you were associated with somebody, they're going to threaten you and do these things with you. That is the evil that we're talking about. This is why the establishment, this is why if you're part of a grassroots group, or if you're not, you need to join one, because these grassroots groups are the ones that are calling this truth out. They're being the warriors that they were created to be. You're being the warrior you were created to be. We need to step up against this. And it's all information. It's all lack of information. It's lack of education. And, I didn't mean to cut you off. You were about to say something.
No. I'm just, all I was going to add was that, the Republican Party, which I'm part of and I've appreciated over the years, from county to county really operate very differently. So,
yes, they
for
do.
example, in York County, where Mike Jones, endorsed an opponent to an incumbent, which is certainly frowned upon, but in York County, they don't generally even endorse candidates. That's not a big part of what York County does, unlike Lancaster County, and I've appreciated their endorsement of me over the years, but Lancaster County does everything possible to make sure they endorse candidates, and then they get behind these candidates and so forth. So there is a difference between county to county on how the party kind of functions as well.
Montgomery County, same way. Montgomery County, I was not the endorsed candidate in Montgomery County. I was the endorsed candidate in Berks County. Now, Berks County wasn't going to do an endorsement, but they did, and they endorsed me. Montgomery County did not do did an endorsement, but they broke their own endorsement laws and bylaws to make sure and ensure that their chosen candidate was the endorsed candidate. And the unfortunate part is they know that a lot of Republicans we're good people. We're nice people. We don't like rocking the boat. And so when those endorsement sheets come out at the elections, if you're the endorsed, then the Republican committee did their work and they vetted these people, and those are the guys that we're supposed to have in office. Well, if that was the case, then Donald Trump would have never won in 2016 because he was not the endorsed candidate. He was completely against the establishment, and we can go down that path pretty deeply. But in my opinion, when the Republican committee starts endorsing folks before the primary, they're choosing who they want in office. And if you have a corrupt establishment committee, and I'm not saying that about Lancaster, but it's for sure in Montgomery County. I have no problem calling out Montgomery County. It is a disaster in Montgomery County. I think they want to lose elections. So I was happy I didn't get their endorsement, but we'll talk about that some other time. To wrap it up, I think it's appalling what they did to you. I think it's appalling what they did to me and my neighbors, because they took my voice away, and I'm not going away on this. And so I need you to make sure that you understand that we need you to stand tall, continue to fight in that belly of the beast, but you have a lot of support from back here. And we need to make sure that we're holding to those amendments and we see the attacks upon our freedoms and liberties. And it's starting, and it's been here, folks. It's been here. You just don't see it. But what you need to do is you need to seek and speak the truth, as we're trying to do here in this program. Why I had Dave come in here today, Representative Zimmerman, forgive me. We're friends, so it's okay. But Dave is a true servant, and he doesn't go by titles. He goes by American. He goes by a servant to the people. And he truly believes that if you're going to serve the people, then you need to be a servant. You are on the bottom of the shoe, right? It is we, the people, that are in command here. And that's what we've forgotten. We have allowed bureaucracies and bureaucratic laws to be passed. We've allowed our Supreme Court to make laws when they shouldn't. And everything that we're seeing here today is completely unconstitutional. Everything that's happening in our country, whether you agree with masks, whether you don't, whether you agree with different factors of life, the jab, whatever you agree or disagree on, the government should not be mandating it. It should be we, the people, deciding to do that. And that's where we see Roe versus Wade. That's where we see our constitutional lines here in the state. That's where we're seeing all these things. And you need to understand the truth of it. And the truth of it is, foundationally is, we, the people, have the power, and that's the way it was set up from the beginning.
Right.
When William Penn, before our Constitution was written, when William Penn came here and gave freedom of religion, that's the way it's supposed to be. The Boston Tea Party was fought because they didn't want to pay taxes on stuff. The Pine Tree riots, all of these things. We have a history here because we've been fighting for our liberties and freedoms. We've had good men and women die fighting for those freedoms and liberties, and we're willingly giving them away out of the guise of safety. I mean, we see gun control being thrown at us all right now, which just go back and look at some of Hitler's speeches. The first thing he did was take away guns out of the public safety. I'm not saying, we don't need to figure some things out, but it's a more head and heart issue than a gun issue, because the guns aren't doing anything. It's the people that are doing the crimes. But the moment that power gains more power by taking it away from you or I, that's when we have a true problem. And that's where we're at in society today. So I don't know if you have anything you want to close up with here, Dave. I really appreciate you coming on, Representative Zimmerman. I do love everything that you're doing for us. I know that you stand tall, stand proud, and you put on the armor of God every day.
You got it. Yeah.
But
thanks so much, Dan. Good to sit down and have a conversation. There's so many more avenues we could go down and have
We could
many
talk for
more
hours.
discussions. But one thing that William Penn said, and I don't have the exact quote here, but somehow if godly men are no longer involved in government, then tyrants are going to rule. Something along those lines, and that's what we need to be check ourselves on every day, because I without a doubt, when we spend time listening to the people that are out and about within the districts, and I try and do that a lot. Myself and my staff visit many businesses. We attend whatever functions we can throughout a district. Over and over and over again, people are very concerned about individual liberties, about this notion there's mandates. There's more concern along those lines than I've ever seen. They want to be much more involved, and are much more involved in schools today because of what's going on with their children. And we could go on and talk about a lot of things. And they're expecting us in the House and the Senate as legislators to actually get some laws passed that, again, assure them of their freedoms. They're so concerned that elections aren't secure. They're so concerned that their freedoms are not secure. There's so many things, and they're all revolve around these individual liberty issues when you really stop and think about it. And that's what I think we're missing as legislators, because we get so involved in other legislation that doesn't do much or mean much, when the whole issue is about preserving the freedoms that our ancestors came here for. If we would go back to that and get some real legislation done revolving around that, people would become much more settled down. They would become much more trusting of legislators and government in general. But the trust factor has completely left. And with the way, I was treated last week, my constituents are treated last week because of it, just adds to this distrust, this anger that's out there that's not going away. And somehow we need to get government back in its place so that the people can again feel like they're free, like they're secure in this country. Things like that matter, and we're not doing anywhere near enough. And I don't think, many constituents are continue to raise those questions. What are you doing? When are you going to do something about some of these concerns that we really have? So again, we could talk a long time, Dan. Lots going on.
So-
Lots of opportunities, though. I mean, there's so many things we can fix, but it's a matter of actually fixing them and actually working together and getting it accomplished.
Parting piece of advice for your fellow American citizens, if they were going to listen to this and they were going to say one thing, what would they, they wanted to hear one thing from what they can do? Because a lot of questions, what can I do? What can I do? What would
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well, and what's encourages me is that I have since this happened last week, I have got, I don't know, literally thousands of phone calls, emails, texts, and so there's tremendous support, and they just don't accept what has happened because in a sense I'm being silenced, and that is not what people want. So just being engaged and talking to legislators, being active with some of these groups and so forth, that's what's going to change the behavior of what's going on today. Because for many in government, they are surprised and cannot believe that all these grassroots groups are still out there and they're still meeting, and many of those rose up right after the 2020 elections. And here they are. They haven't gone away. As a matter of fact, they're gaining in numbers. And the latest I've heard, Dan, was that there's like 63 or 64 groups now across Pennsylvania. Some are made up of kind of county groups, but there's like 64 or some grassroots groups. That is going to make the changes that people are wanting, I believe.
Absolutely. So you heard Representative Zimmerman there. I will say in closing, it's time to act. Stand up. Don't sit down. Also up at our Capitol, I believe somewhere, it says the only way for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And I'm going to add to that, how long can you be considered good if you still do nothing? And that goes with the silence in the face of evil is still evil. And so if you're within the sound of my voice, and I hope this goes far and wide, we cannot allow these things to happen any longer. We need to step up. We need to stand up. We need to speak the truth in the darkness. And we need to find the answers on our own, because we're not going to get it by just listening to politicians on TV or watching the news. We're going to have to find those answers ourselves. And the answers are going to start, and they're going to come from reading the Constitution first, understanding where you stand as a citizen right now with we the people, understanding that first. Go find a course. There's a lot of courses out there that you can go learn the Constitution at. Secondly, go find your own truth. Do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. If you heard something here today that tripped your trigger, go look it up. What we've tried to cover everything as truthful as possible. We bounced around a little bit, but the end game here is we need to stand up as citizens and get rid of the establishment and stand against this tyrannical rule that's coming against us, because it's Democrat and Republican. So be the warriors that you were created to be. Stand up. Ask yourself, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And don't allow this. Just say no. As Representative Zimmerman just said, we have grassroots standing up. Say no. It's your right. Say no while you still can. And so fight the good fight. Stand with us. Stand proud. And be an American. And be the light on the shining hill that we need to be for the rest of the world. Thank you.